We're still traipsing around in the book of Mark and had some good discussions along the way. Um, this morning we're going to start out with Bartimaeus. There's the blind man, and I want to bring up some things with regard to that. Kind of, fighting the lullaby effect. So as we go through these passages, we want to see if we can't expand our understanding, or at least talk about some aspects and angles of these things that perhaps we hadn't before. So that'll be our goal. Austin, you'd like to lead us in prayer this morning? Thank you.
Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to gather together to study your word. Help Daryl as he leads us in our study to have remembrance of the things he's prepared, and help us as students to listen and to apply the words that we see in your word to our lives, to be better servants of yours and be more like your son. In Jesus' name,
amen. Okay. Okay, so, oh boy. Okay.
Technology.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, I know what happened. This thing is on the other side. So if I do this, put this here. Let's try it.
Be back on
Excuse me. All right. Mark chapter 10, 46. Mark chapter 10, verse 46, as we pick up. It's been a little while since we've had this class, but here we go. Down at verse 46, Bartimaeus receives his sight. Then they came to Jericho, and he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a large crowd. A blind beggar named Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the road. When he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many were sternly telling him to be quiet, but he kept crying out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him here." So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, stand up. He is calling for you." Throwing aside his cloak, he jumped up and came to Jesus. And answering him, Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the blind man said to him, "Rabboni, I want to regain my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and began following him on the road. So here's Jesus, the Son of God, as he's introduced in the beginning of the book. And what is he showing us about himself right here as he heals this man? What is he showing us? Something about himself.
Well, he's never too, he's in the moment right now. He's got to be just mentally in the moment, but it doesn't stop him from taking time to be compassionate.
Yeah, compassion and his power. Okay. Yeah, Kevin?
The thing that was striking me was, well, I guess like Mark really stands out to me because of like how his gospel is structured. Like it's, he just really connects things together as they work to be threaded into a bigger lessons, I guess. Like, and so and just immediately following the discussion from the previous verses that we talked about last week, the last thing he said was, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And then I just looked it up because I had never paid attention to it, but it struck me, it's really weird that it says the guy's name is Bartimaeus, and we know Bar means son of. So in the language we know it's son of Timaeus, and then it's translated again, Bartimaeus is the son of Timaeus. So that seems like a red flag to me of why is it telling us this, why is it's emphasizing it, that this guy is this Timaeus idea.
Well,
I just looked up the meaning of Timaeus, and it means highly prized. And so I think that's really an incredible illustration of Jesus having just said that he's come to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing Mark gives us is, oh, they're at Jericho,
Oh, there you go. Mhm.
and this guy's name means highly prized, but he does not look like he's highly prized.
Right.
You know, he sounds like, you know, some of the rough sorts that we have in Seattle.
Mhm.
But Jesus saw that he was highly prized,
Mhm.
and Jesus stopped and made time for him.
Mhm. Yeah, wonderful. And it is at least noteworthy that his name is given. You know, sometimes it's not, but here this man's name was given. So we see compassion and we see power on the part of Jesus. Now, here's a little fun thing to do. David was, we're going to talk about this morning, but David was like a prototype of Christ, a foreshadow of Christ, right? And I'm going to read you a passage here, and I want you to interpret it for me. This is in 2 Samuel 5, verse 6. It says, now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, and they said to David, you shall not come in here, but the blind and lame will turn you away, thinking David cannot enter here. And nevertheless, David captured the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. David said on that day, whoever would strike the Jebusites, let him reach the blind and the lame, who are hated by David's soul, through the water tunnel. Therefore they say, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. So, did David hate the blind and the lame? How does that strike you? How does that strike you? See? So, this is a little challenge here. So, remember Mephibosheth, who was Jonathan's son, lame in both feet, and David not only restored all of Saul's lands and everything to him, but he also had him eat at his table, which he didn't have to do. And so it doesn't seem that David was a hater of the blind and the lame. So the Jebusites, this is the way it strikes me, that they were taunting the power of David. Okay? Here's a quote, says, the Jebusites probably meant that the fortifications were so strong that the city needed no able-bodied defenders. David quotes their words in ordering the attack. He uses the same words. So the blind and the blind and the lame will keep you out of here. You don't have any power. You can't come in here. And David uses the same words back when he ordered that attack. So it doesn't strike me that he hated, loathed the blind and the lame, but he responded in kind to the taunt. Right? He quoted the Jebusites' own words, as I said, when he was ordering that attack. So a priest could not serve in the temple who had a defect, but people who were blind or lame could enter the temple as worshipers. They just couldn't serve as priests, right? And so, as the son of David, Jesus, when he came, he wielded his authority in works of healing and mercy and compassion and those things for the despised and for the downcast. You know, that's how he conducted himself here. And so Bartimaeus believed that Jesus was able to do what he said. And there's Old Testament passages that go along with that. One of these, this recalls this Isaiah 42:16, I will lead the blind by a way they do not know. In paths they do not know, I will guide them. I will make darkness into light before them and rugged places into plains. These are the things I will do, and I will not leave them undone. I will not forsake them. And so, yeah, I think David was responding to a taunt. And Bartimaeus had faith, because what does he say? Your faith has made you well, okay? So, as I've said so many times before, God rewards trust. He rewards that every single time. Yeah, Todd?
So do you think there's something to Bartimaeus calling him son of David?
Well, that's, yeah, there is something to that, because when you look back at, our whole sermon this morning is going to be dealing with this, but when you look back at the promises to David, that his throne would endure forever as the sun before me, God said, they knew that David had that promise that he would always have someone sit on his throne. So they knew the Old Testament. So yeah, there was significance to that, obviously. Okay. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, I guess where I was going with it is because I think the fact that he's blind and the fact that Jesus is so compassionate with him,
Mm-hmm.
and then you go back to 2 Samuel and look at David
Mm-hmm.
and his treatment of the lame and the blind.
Mm-hmm.
It almost seems to me that Bartimaeus is showing Jesus that he recognizes that history.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's a very humble way of requesting compassion from Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
more than if he had called him anything else.
Yeah,
Good point.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good point, Todd. Anybody else? Comments or questions or rebuttals? Yes, Tony.
Just a question, did you say that the blind could worship? They just couldn't be priests? I didn't think they could go into the temple without their own command.
Well, I thought they could, but maybe I've got that.
I could be wrong.
Well, I know that the priests couldn't. If they had a defect, they couldn't serve.
Right.
Yeah, I know that for sure. I'll have to look at that, yeah. Anybody got any ideas about that one? Okay, well, we'll check it out. Okay, so Bartimaeus is healed. Jesus came to serve, right? As Kevin pointed out, he's healing and he's performing acts of compassion. Okay? And that was very much in the character of Jesus. So, as we go into Mark chapter 11, we have the triumphal entry into Jerusalem by Jesus. So this is the beginning of the open confrontation between Jesus and the opposition. Before, how did Jesus conduct himself as far as being public? Remember his brother said, if you wanted to be known, make yourself known to the world. And he didn't allow himself to be made a king. He avoided that fanfare. But now, with this triumphal entry into Jerusalem, this is the time when this opposition is going to start. And of course, we have the cross on the horizon, okay? And he's talked about that, 3 times, I think, here in Mark. And so he arrives with the cheers of the people that hail the coming of David's kingdom. Let's take a look. Let's take a look at this language in the book of Mark. I should have marked that. Oh, yes, I did. Okay, here we go. Okay, chapter 11. As they approached Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples. By the way, when Dan May was giving his presentation, he was talking about these different house, something means the house of this and house of that. And when he came to Bethany, I was like, oh, I know this. 'Cause remember the biblical botany stuff we did a while ago? And so it means the house of the first ripe figs. So we're going to look at this fig tree here in a little bit. And Jesus actually, even though it wasn't the time for figs, but if there were going to be any, they would be there. Okay, and so he had a reasonable expectation that he would find fruit there. But we'll come back to that. That was just a little sidelight. I might have blurted that out. Maybe it's good I didn't remember. Okay, as they approached Jerusalem at Bethphage and Bethany near the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there on which no one yet has ever sat. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' you say, 'The Lord has need of it,' and immediately he will send it back here." They went away and found the colt tied at the door outside the street, and they untied it. Some of the bystanders were saying to them, "What are you doing, untying the colt?" They spoke to him just as Jesus had told them, and they gave them permission. They brought the colt to Jesus and put their coats on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their coats in the road, and others spread leafy branches which they had cut from the fields. Those who went in front and those who followed were shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest." Jesus entered Jerusalem and came into the temple, and after looking around at everything, he left. It's curious. He left for Bethany with the 12, since it was already late. On the next day, when they had left Bethany, he became hungry. Seeing at a distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples were listening. All right. So, Jesus comes in, his third visit to the temple. He's going to be fending off challenges from the opposition. And he goes into the temple and he looks around at everything and he leaves. Now, that's significant, I think, in light of what's going to happen the next day. And we want to talk about this temple cleansing and what he was really doing, okay? And see if we can get some insight into that, okay? So the next day, he's going to drive out the money changers and those who are selling doves from the temple, which is sandwiched by the cursing of the fig tree. And on this visit to the temple, again, he's going to be fending off some challenges. You know, the baptism of John, is it from heaven or from men? And he's going to respond with a counter question in that instance, as we'll see a little bit later. And then he's going to give an ominous parable that they are going to recognize as being directed toward them. And we'll see what happens with that. So, all right. So, the colt that is bound has to be untied, of course, and taken to Jesus. And, of course, there's a couple of Old Testament passages that talk about the colt, right? Zechariah 9:9 is one of the most famous ones, where he talks about him coming in, riding on the foal of a donkey, right? And so that's one of the most well-known. And those passages are interpreted messianically as looking toward Christ, of course. And I'm sure that's how Most of us have learned that in the past. Now, remember how often Jesus couldn't get a moment's peace? Remember, he tried to get, alone with his disciples, and the people just, they're knocking on the door. He can't get any peace at all. So this is a complete reversal of that. And now he's going out publicly and allowing himself to be declared and praised here by the people. Okay, he encourages public rejoicing at his entrance. Okay. So the disciples, as you saw, saddled the colt with their own garments. Many in the crowd spread their coats on the road. And now, was it not somewhat anticlimactic that after this, Jesus goes into the temple, he looks around, and then he leaves? But it sets the stage for what's going to happen the next day. And the true significance of what is going to happen can only be filled in by the Old Testament. In Malachi chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, he says, "Behold, I am going to send my messenger, and he will clear the way before me, and the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says the Lord of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and fuller's soap." Okay. So we want to talk about here in a little bit what Jesus was actually after. Somebody give me your thoughts about what was Jesus looking to accomplish. Let's see here. So we have the fig tree. In verse 15, when they came to Jerusalem, he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were buying and selling in the temple. Okay, so as we're looking at this, first of all, the fig tree is going to explain what's happening here. And we'll give some alternatives here in a moment. "And overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he would not permit anyone to carry merchandise to the temple. And he began to teach and say to them, Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations? But you have made it a robber's den." The chief priests and the scribes heard this and began seeking how to destroy him, for they were afraid of him, for the whole crowd was astonished at his teaching. All right? And so he comes into Jerusalem, and his action in the temple is largely symbolic. So what is your understanding as to what Jesus was trying to accomplish in the temple when he cleansed it? Sheila? Okay. Okay. Steve?
Well, all of these things, the writing on the colt, the cleansing of the temple, all of this seems a very overt way of him saying, I am the king.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, Robert?
In all of this text, I guess I'm seeing he's ensuring that he's fulfilling the scriptures, right?
Mm-hmm.
He said, didn't come to, again, be served, he came to serve, but he also fulfilled all the prophecies regarding the Messiah, and many of these are part of that.
Okay,
So,
okay. All right, so let's take a look at this. So, is he attempting to reform the temple? He's looking at what's going on, and he comes in and he says, I'm going to change this. I'm going to reform this. So he kicks out the money changers and those selling doves. Okay. Now, yeah, Robert?
I think we talked about this in some earlier lessons with regard to the nation of Israel, like when they were in captivity, what did they do? They looked to the temple. They were always looking to this physical temple.
Mhm.
And I think what you're trying to lead us into is that the temple is now a spiritual temple instead of a physical temple, which they had put their hopes and trust on the physical temple instead of the relationship they had with God.
Okay. Yeah.
To me, this is the last week of the Lord being
Mhm.
here before his resurrection. And first of all, that's a compressed time frame. But it's a bookend, right? Because when he came, and I'm going to read from Luke, right? When he came to the synagogue, he announced what he was going to do.
Mhm.
Listen to the prophecy from Isaiah that he reads, right? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim the liberty of the captive and recovering the sight of the blind,
Mhm.
to set at liberty those who are oppressed. Who was being oppressed at the synagogue or at the temple? Everybody.
Everyone. Yeah.
That's why did everybody gravitate towards him? Because they were all being oppressed. Why oppressed? Why were the Pharisees so frustrated? Because they were the oppressors
Mhm.
that were doing this to him, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.
Mhm.
That's what he's here to do. He's here to finish what he started, what he announced, what Isaiah had announced
Mhm.
hundreds and hundreds of years ago. To me, that's what's the flow is here.
Yeah. Well, very good. Very good. Yeah, Todd?
So, it's not coincidental that Jesus curses fig tree here.
Yeah, we're going to look at that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, all right, I'll let you.
Okay, yeah.
I don't want
Yeah.
to get in, I don't want to give my thoughts about it here.
Yeah. We're seeing Mark's, we talked about this bracketing technique he uses. Well, he'll have something and then he'll go to something else and then, one will go back and explain. So we're going to see that here in just a moment. Okay. So here's the thing. Jesus was a prophet. And prophets, now this may be a little different, so this is up for discussion, okay? This is battling the lullaby effect, maybe there's another way of looking at it, right? So prophets didn't just make announcements. They acted in order to communicate. They did things in order to communicate. Okay? We know examples of what we call sign acts. You remember that term? And so Jesus enters the temple as a prophet and graphically acts out God's rejection of the temple cult and the destruction that's coming. Let's think about that. Sheila.
Oh, yeah, so I was just listening, like, what's in it for us that we could get out of this? Like when Jesus went to the temple the first day,
Mm-hmm.
and he just looked around and didn't say a word, so
Mhm.
he left out. So did he go and consult God, and sat on it to see, instead of him just going off in the
Mhm.
temple, and people looking and be like, well, I can't follow him because he tripping. So, but he had to go and maybe since he was a prophet and the prophets consulted God, that he had to listen to how God wanted him to handle it, which he already knew how he was going to handle it because he was God. But it was in human form, and it was like a lesson how we can handle stuff, before we just say, oh yeah, I'm ready to snap, I'm going to go off up in here, because y'all doing something that don't make no sense to me. You know, but he didn't want the people to look at him like that, because he probably would have lost the followers if he wouldn't have went back and came back the next day and did the thing that God wanted him to do.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's quite intriguing to me that he goes and he just looks at everything.
Yeah.
You know, you wonder what he was thinking. Okay. Now let's look at it from this standpoint. Okay. Do you think that after Jesus ran out the money changers, etc., remember, and before we talked about the mafia, the Sadducees, and they owned, you know, they grew the animals, they sold the animals, you know, all of this stuff was run by them. It was quite corrupt. That's why the Essenes, one of the reasons why the Essenes left and went out to the desert, because of the corruption. They wanted to get away from it. So it was very corrupt, that's for sure. So do you think that after Jesus cleansed the temple, that they went back to doing what they were doing?
Sure. Totally.
Okay?
Because wasn't that the second time you cleansed it? Didn't we do that before?
Yeah, yeah. See, so my point is that he wasn't trying to reform the temple. You know, I'm going to clean this out, it's never going to happen again. It's not what he was after. Okay? E.P. Sanders, in his book Jesus and Judaism, says his actions were designed, quote, to make a point rather than to have a concrete result. So they're going to go back to doing that. Money had to be exchanged. Right? If money cannot be exchanged into the holy currency, the shekel of the temple, then where would the monetary support for the temple sacrifices and the priests be? Okay? They had to do that. If sacrificial animals could not be purchased, then the sacrifices would end. So they're going to come back, you know. But he's teaching here. His teaching transforms a simple display of protest into an announcement of a divine judgment. So I'm looking at it from that standpoint, okay? That temple soon would be destroyed, okay? And Jesus is rejecting the temple cult, the things that are going on, the corruption that we spent so much time talking about in the past. And as I said, the temple is soon going to, you know, relatively soon, it's going to be destroyed. And so he wasn't trying to reform it, okay? But he was, you know, something to think about. It's not the normal way that we have necessarily been taught about this, but that he's performing a sign act to announce a coming judgment on that temple. Yeah, Tony?
Wasn't he also making sure that he gets killed on his time frame? At this point, he's ready, it's the week, he's ready to get going, he's ready to be killed.
Yeah,
So he's also doing this, announcing, just like he did on the fig tree, which we covered.
yeah,
Isn't that what he was doing here? He's doing the same kind of showing that what they're doing is wrong.
yeah, yeah. So let's go back to the fig tree now. So in passages like, let's see, I just wrote it down here, Hosea 9:10. So the fig tree was symbolic of Israel, right? One example, Hosea 9:10, I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw your forefathers as the earliest fruit on the fig tree in its first season. Okay, just many of those, okay? Speaking of them in that way. So when Jesus cursed the fig tree, again, oh, yeah, Robert, I saw your hand earlier.
This just came to my mind, and I probably have to go back. I did go back to Leviticus 19 about the blind.
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't think we're supposed to have a stumbling block for the blind or the lame.
Right,
But then he does specifically say the sons of Aaron with regard to the
Right.
blind cannot serve.
that's the passage
I
that I
think
had
you're
read.
right. Secondly, when I read this, what jumped out at me is selling in the temple.
Mhm.
And I'd have to go back and look, but was that something that the temple was set up to allow for those transactions in the temple? Or was that supposed to be done outside the temple?
That's a good question.
So I'll have to go back and
Yeah.
study that.
Well, you know, because I know the exchange of money was legitimate, they had to do that.
Yeah, because they were coming from all parts
Yeah.
of the nation.
But I've never thought about exactly where, you know, that was to occur or not. That's a good question. Yeah,
So the selling, you're saying that was legitimate, that they were supposed to do that? I thought that was all something that's just not from the law, it's not, that was something that they were doing to be the mafia and make money.
Well, yeah.
Changing that there was nothing that said they had to change it into a temple currency and all that kind of stuff. Do you think that that was something that was lawful?
Well, I was just thinking of it from the standpoint of, you know, that the sacrificial animals had to be available for the sacrifices to go on. So, well, I'll consider that.
Okay, because I
Yeah.
just heard the opposite, that was all something that was not a part of the old law.
Okay, yeah, Todd?
Wasn't there also a set price for those sacrifices?
Oh.
A dove could only cost this much, you know?
Oh, you're asking me questions I don't know how to answer.
But there is, I mean, there is verse 16, and they would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple.
There you
That's
go.
So
There you go.
So
Yeah.
were you to bring a sacrifice, an appropriate sacrifice, they weren't gonna have it.
They wouldn't let
Because
them do it.
that wasn't the business. It was set up.
They buy theirs.
Yeah. All right.
Traditions.
Yeah, good, good, good.
So isn't that, this forum here, this is really Stump the Teacher?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm a little rusty. I've been, yeah.
Oh, we're doing good here.
Yeah, I am a little rusty today, so that's okay, we'll get it back. Yeah, gonna forget about all that free time and California sunshine and all that stuff, so, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, so the fig tree, of course, was a part of this Mark's bracketing technique. So, you know, we looked first at Jesus' actions in the temple, and then shows how the cursing of the fig tree helps explain what it means. What did he do to the fig tree? The fig tree represent Israel, and what did he do to the fig tree? Okay, he killed it. Okay, does that sound like judgment? Okay, there's a parallel there of judgment, and so yeah, very good. So yeah, so we had the triumphal entry, and then anybody have any more? Yeah.
Sorry, trying to. So back in verse 11, when he first gets there, he shows up at the temple and looks around and nothing's going on. Then he sees the fig tree and goes and checks the fig tree out, and there's nothing going on. And then he curses it. Then he goes back to the temple and sees what's going on, but it's sick and rotten. And then he goes back to the fig tree and sees what's going on with the fig tree. And the fig tree is sick and rotten. So I definitely see the parallel there. One of my questions, I guess, that is raised following that, in verse 11, he shows up at the temple and looks around, and there's nothing going on because it was already late. That makes sense. Seems reasonable. And then he goes to the fig tree, goes to check it for fruit, but it says it's out of season. Like, you wouldn't expect to find figs out of season, but he still curses it. So I guess that's kind of one of the questions that's raised for me reading it is, why is it specifically mentioned that it's out of season? For the fig tree to curse it, and then, cause that seems like there's things that like are big flags to me, they're like, there's something here if it doesn't make sense, cause it seems unfair to say, oh, it's not your season, you don't produce fruit during this time of year.
So maybe that wasn't the point, right?
But there's a reason that it would tell us that it's out of season. They could have just left that out.
Okay, yeah, Tony?
What I've read about that is that it produces, the fig tree will produce a green bud.
Mhm.
It comes out, and that even out of season, you can tell whether it's going to produce fruit or not.
Mhm.
So even though he's saying out of season, it doesn't mean, well, I can't tell whether you are going to have fruit or not. That I can actually look at you and see there's not going to be any fruit off of this.
Okay.
That's what I've read it is.
Okay, so let's pick up at verse 19. When evening came, they would go out of the city, and as they were passing by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots up. Being reminded, Peter said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree which you cursed has withered. And Jesus answered, saying to them, have faith in God. Interesting, right? Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says is going to happen, it will be granted him. Therefore I say to you, all things for which you pray and ask, believe that you have received them, and they will be granted you. So they noticed the fig tree, it's dead from the roots up, and the answer to that is have faith in God. Okay? How does that connect? Was that a miracle? Was it a miraculous cursing of the fig tree? What do you think? I'm going to say yes. Okay, it was miraculous. This is quite interesting because, we talk about, look at that fig tree and what he did as an act of judgment corresponding to his cleansing the temple in anticipation, kind of showing this is what's going to happen. And I think about him going and looking around everywhere, maybe, don't know, but just thinking about the fact that, all of that rich history that's represented by the temple and what it meant to Israel, that it's going to be gone. And why was the temple destroyed? Really easy answer. Right? They rejected the Messiah, right? So some of these passages are tricky to deal with, especially for a rusty preacher. But yeah.
So I've been sitting on this one because it wasn't germane at all to what you've been trying to do here. But this passage right here, for me, has always been a faith builder for this one subtle little reason. That we're told about, and we didn't need to know this, but we're told that they were to go back into town and find a colt tied off, to go take the colt. If anybody asks, and I think they did ask,
They did,
they
yeah.
were supposed to say, the master has requested it, and just like that, it was okay, go ahead and
Yeah.
take the colt.
Yeah.
I find that whole thing very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
that we were told about this somewhat unnecessary little aspect of what was going on here.
Mhm.
And it feels just like the picture in Luke, I think chapter 4, where Jesus is in Nazareth and everybody's gonna take him, throw him off the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
But we're told, right there at the cliff, he just turned around and walked right through them and left.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? This angry mob that's gonna kill him, he
Mhm.
just walked through them. There are things, it seems to me, that speak to the absolute necessity that God's controlling every bit of this.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that becomes just this huge faith builder, something that I would say to people that you're trying to teach the gospel to.
Mm-hmm.
God's got, this whole thing is happening very intentionally. This
Mhm.
whole thing is completely under God's control, right down to the last little details, and that colt feels like that to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
That it was tied off in the city, just standing there, just
Yeah.
go up and get it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. 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 Very good. Well, we're out of time. What do we have? Yeah. Oh, Gina.
I'm perplexed with a little bit with the, just have faith in God. Is it because, like, the temple represented righteousness, or it looked like righteousness from the outside? And the fig tree looked like it would be fruit bearing from the outside, and yet they weren't producing fruit, and they weren't producing, the works of righteousness.
Yeah.
And now the temple will be destroyed, and that's gonna shake people's faith.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, is that why he's telling them, have faith in God? Don't just go by your worldly sight
Mm-hmm.
and what you perceive.
Yeah.
Have faith in God and know that he's
Yeah.
more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can ask of him anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Rick
a
and
really
Lynn.
quick,
Yeah.
another example, just to kind of dovetail off what Steve said, is that when they needed to go stay at an inn and they needed money,
Mhm.
Jesus just said, okay, just go catch this fish and in its mouth's gonna be some money. It's like, okay, that was just amazing to me. It was a miracle, okay? Was it necessary?
Mm.
Could have easily gone to the inn,
Yeah.
and the innkeeper would have just said, yeah, stay here for free.
Yeah.
But it was showing his absolute control over the situation.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Very good, y'all. We're late.